look, thank you very much, Tony, and it is lovely to be part of the FinPro family. Now, I only have a few minutes to run through the topic around software as a service, and I guess to sort of highlight an issue that's come to the fore in I guess over the last 12 months or so. So what I will do, you know, and I'm not the best of technology, but I'll endeavour to share my screen. I've got just a few quick slides in relation to this. So hopefully you can see that screen now. Hopefully that's come through for you okay. So really, I guess the first thing we wanted to talk about, or the issue we wanted to talk about is software as a service, and the main issue, I guess, or the focus is that IFRIC issued an agenda decision that came out in April last year. That decision was not a new standard, nor did it change a standard in any way whatsoever. It has just clarified the application of AASB 138 in relation to situations where you are acquiring software as a service. And just to take it back a step, just to be clear what we're talking about here. So software as a service is where you enter into an arrangement to utilise a vendor's software rather than entering into an arrangement to license the use of that software yourself or to purchase the software. So, you know, you don't buy an asset, you buy access to the vendor's software. So it is a little bit different from normal situations or historically how we treated acquisitions of systems and the like, but it's certainly a much more common process now. So we are seeing more and more instances where councils are acquiring access to a system rather than actually buying the systems themselves. At its core, and really the unbolded piece on the slide there is the core of it. The agenda decision requires management to capitalise elements of expenditure to meet the definition of an intangible asset, and other amounts are expensed. And I'll sort of, I guess, you know, thinking about that practically, what does that actually mean? If I just bear with me 1 second. If we think about the practicality or the practical issues there, is that the SaaS agreements are not an agreement to acquire an intangible asset. You're simply paying paying for the right to access the vendor's system. So they're not giving rise to intangible assets in any way. The reality is that often there will be substantial configuration costs incurred as part of the move to a new system. And it's these costs that the IFRIC decision relates to, and that we need to consider about in the context of AASB 138. We're not considering the costs of the software of a service. That's not going to be capitalised, but the costs that you may incur in configuring your existing systems to be compatible with the vendor's software may result in an intangible asset. So I think key point in the whole consideration around software as a service is we're not talking about, and there's not a question about whether you would capitalise your software as a service costs, but we are, and there is ambiguity around costs that you incur in configuring your systems to work with the vendor's systems. So I guess, you know, again, on a real simple basis, if it's your asset, there's a possibility to capitalise it. If it's the vendor's asset that we're talking about, then you need to expense that. That's not an asset. Now, just again, to complicate that a little bit, you know, if you're paying for access in advance, that might give rise to a prepayment that could potentially, you know, sit on the balance sheet, but it would sit on the balance sheet as that sort of prepayment. And I think when we're looking at most of these software as a service agreements, they're mostly a sort of monthly type fee arrangement. They do vary, but again, that could give rise to a prepayment. And I think I should have said at the outset, any questions, you know, if you put them into the, if you've got, put them into the block, and I think Tony's monitoring those for me because my technical skills don't go anywhere near to be able to do two things at once. So look, just some guidance, and I will talk about a couple of documents that I think Gabrielle will make available after the session. But in terms of the, if we think about our costs, in terms of things like pre-implementation research activities, again, this is really using the guidance straight out of AASB 138. Any of those sort of costs would be expensed. Now, importantly, the modifications to current systems, so, whether it's staff costs or consultants or contractors that are coming in to update, upgrade or modify your systems so that they work with the vendor software, they could be subject to capitalising and meet that test. Anything that, any code changes or anything that the vendor does to modify their system to work with your system is not likely to be capitalised, because you're not going to end up owning the IP to that. It's not going to be your asset. In terms of configuration costs, again, costs around your network to make your system compatible, again, have the capacity to be capitalised where they meet those requirements under 138. And just to be clear, like under 138, you've got a separate identifiable asset. So it's, if you like, it's your system that is being updated to enable it to work with the vendor's software. Again, probably one of the grey areas in this space is staff costs, and it's always been a grey area as to what level there is capitalised or not. Probably, it's not so much the staff costs, it's the grey area. It's perhaps the systems for capturing and unlike the accountants who take care of every 6 minutes of their day and record that separately, a lot of the people involved in processes are perhaps not so detailed in their time recording. But again, there's a mix of those. If they're directly attributable to preparing the asset for its intended use, clear, that's preparing your asset, okay, so your systems, modifications to your systems, then potentially they'll get capitalised as part of that system, your system. Training through the implementation phase, those sort of costs would be expensed. I think I've only got another slide or so to go, and it's just a little bit more on that. Generally, data conversion activities. So if you've got to, clean your data, if you've got to transfer your data across to the new system, then generally that will be expensed. That can be quite a big task if you're actually taking a lot of historic data across. You may purchase software to assist with that. And again, that would potentially be an asset because it's a separately identifiable asset. But again, if you're purchasing software to assist you with the data conversion piece, and you're only going to use it for that one transition, then there'd be a question about whether there's the useful life of that software as well. But potentially it could be. Admin and that, as with anything under 138, would be expensed, and any sort of the post-implementation costs, training, manuals, those sort of things would be expensed as well. So just to recap, software as a service is becoming more and more common across local government. It's a situation where we're paying for access to the vendor's system, and we won't go through all the details, but that's generally pretty apparent. That the vendor's offering that system to a lot of different users. It's not a system that's been developed specifically for you, so you're paying for access to the vendor's system. That's not an asset for you. It's a service level agreement, if you like. I don't want to complicate it, but it's highly unlikely that it will give rise to a lease under the lease standard, because you don't have the right to defer other use of the system, or the vendor providing the system to other users, all those sort of things. But don't get excited by leases. The costs that may be capitalised associated with this area are the costs that you incur in updating or bringing your systems to the stage that they can work with the vendor's systems. And then it's only a maybe whether they would be capitalised. So really the purpose, I guess, is to raise a bit of awareness of the issue at this stage. If you're doing any of this process, if you're changing and updating systems and you're moving to software as a service, really important to be aware of it, because there is a potential that you could end up with a pretty significant expenditure on transition, which in another world or another time may have been capitalised into an intangible asset. So I think it's important to be aware of it going into these potential changes. But look, I'll pause there. I think I've just about used up my 10 minutes, and perhaps Tony, if there's any questions.
No, I guess how many people do you know that get excited by leases is probably one question, Martin. But no, I think it's thanks for the snapshot presentation. Given that, like I said, there was a number of people inquiring, and I think the sector is probably still playing catch up a little bit in this space compared to some of the private sector in terms of how they acquire systems. But I guess if there's any questions, you can put your hand up and you can put your camera on, or otherwise through the chat. But I'm sure if you have any that you think of later on, we can take them on board and speak to Martin at a later time as well. But we do have one from Luke in the chat. Our internal discussions think PaaS platform as a service should be similar treatment to SaaS? Question mark.
Okay, I can't see that question in my chat.
Oh, it's direct to me, sorry. So, yeah, so internal discussions think that the PaaS platform as a service should be similar to the treatment of the SaaS system, I guess, acquirement. So the treatment in terms of how they must, I'm guessing Luke is suggesting that they must think they having to capitalise regardless of whether they purchase or lease. But Luke, you might want to expand on that or put it through to the group. Yeah, that's okay. We'll see if Luke comes back to me. Otherwise, yeah, we can take that on notice. Were there any other questions for Martin? Otherwise, thanks, Martin, for your time, as always.
Always.
And yeah, I'm sure we'll see you the next time round.
Indeed.
So,